Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us. My name is Robert. I'll be your host. I'm joined with my friends Brad and Patty, and this is Winslow Homer and the American Experience, our latest art history program. Thanks so much for being here. Let's go ahead and get started. So, we're going to be talking about Winslow Homer. He was the quintessential American artist of the mid to late 1800s. He was born in 1836 and he passed away in 1910. And he made all of these great, iconic paintings depicting life in America. So we're going to be talking about these. Perhaps you've seen a few of these before. If you have, great.
Robert, I lost your voice. I don't know if anybody else can hear you or not, but you just suddenly
No,
cut
he
out.
dropped off.
Okay. He's moving his arrow, so I don't know if he's hearing us.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, we lost you quite a while, Robert.
Okay, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Wouldn't be a Zoom program without one or two technical difficulties.
No.
Uh, let's see. Oh, so we're going to be talking about the American experience. And what does that mean? Well, if you think of the United States, you probably have kind of ideas or opinions about America and the United States. And I really like American art. I really like American history. And I like how the two are related to one another. So you have artists throughout the course of time visually documenting and recording what's going on in American history. And then at the same time, you have artists through their artworks that are inspiring and influencing American popular culture. So we'll be talking about that as we go through our program today. Winslow Homer was born in Boston, Massachusetts. His father was a businessman and his mother was an amateur watercolor painter. So perhaps he inherited his artistic genes from her. He began his career as a magazine illustrator and he spent the later years of his life in Prouts Neck, Maine. And for 5 decades, from approximately 1860 or so to 1910, Homer was the era's premier visual interpreter of the American way of life, or the quintessential painter of the American experience. So let's go through and look at Homer's artwork, and we'll do it in mostly a chronological order. He started out his career as a magazine and newspaper illustrator and also a book illustrator. Here are a few examples of his work. You can see he's very talented. This is an era when they had photography and they had magazines and newspapers, but they didn't have the technology to put photos or photographs directly into the magazines or the newspapers. So they had to have illustrators who could make the drawings that could be in these publications, and that's what Homer was doing. Here's a group of ladies waiting for calls on New Year's Day. And so he's based in New England during this time, and he's traveling around making illustrations for different publications, mostly magazines.
This is one of those famous classic calendars, I think.
Oh, which one? This one?
Yeah, I forget what they were called, but it used to be back in the 70s, I would say 60s and 70s, you'd see these calendars all over New England homes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
That's cool.
nostalgia for that old New England history.
Okay. That's cool. And then in 1861, he goes to Washington, D.C. to cover the inauguration of President Abraham Lincoln. And then there's a picture of Homer, Winslow Homer. So the Civil War breaks out, and because Homer is a journalist, he gets to experience the war. Here's a great quote from Shelby Foote talking about the American experience in the Civil War. The Civil War defined us as what we are, and it opened us up to being what we became, good and bad. It was the crossroads of our being, and it was a hell of a crossroads. So, if you joined us for the program we had previously on George Caleb Bingham, you can maybe see some comparisons and contrasts between Homer's artwork, which he was born several years later, And so early in his career, he's doing these illustrations again for magazines, mostly Harper's Weekly. Harper's Weekly at the time, it was kind of like the Time magazine of the day. It was like the main periodical. And so Homer is working for them. He's visiting the troops. He's going to see battles and he's documenting what's taking place. His illustrations end up getting put in Harper's Weekly. So people back home can kind of see what's going on with the war. Again, they have photography, but there's no way to take photos of moving action like this. Now, I tend to believe that maybe he was suffering from some kind of PTSD or something because eventually he just stops doing any types of depictions of battles. And so you'll have to be on the lookout for the transition in his career. And then today's program, we're being talking about museums all across the country. So perhaps you'll see some artwork that are at museums near your home that you can go visit in person, or perhaps on your next trip or vacation, you can see some places as well. Like, for instance, did you know that one of the great Winslow Homer paintings is at the Portland Museum of Art? Not in Oregon, but in Maine. And it's called The Sharpshooter. It's from 1863. And this is a really well known Civil War painting. It's depicting the horrors of war. But interestingly enough, the death is not actually shown because it's depicting a sharpshooter, or I guess in modern terminology, they would call this a sniper. So this particular gentleman, they had these sharpshooters on both sides, north and south. He's up in a tree and he's waiting for someone to get in his range, and then he'll pull the trigger, and then that will be the end of that. So he's kind of here implying death, showing this, but not actually directly to us. And these sharpshooters or snipers were extremely dangerous during the war. The guns, even back then, had a range of several hundred yards, and so they were very deadly. So a very interesting choice of subject matter by Homer. Here's the full view of the work. This ended up becoming a print also that was widely distributed during the war. And so you can see the soldiers perched up in the tree, waiting for the opportunity to shoot his gun. Then after that, though, he really focuses not on battles anymore, but like camp life. So you don't really see action scenes. Like if you were thinking of a visualization of what the Civil War would be like, you'd probably pick battles and people charging and horses and stuff like that. But he's really depicting camp life for the, say, second half of the war. Here's a painting at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. It's called Home Sweet Home. It's from 1863.
For those who've seen Gettysburg and thinking of the connections among them, consider this scene and imagine those the earliest scenes of Gettysburg. Can you see the real resemblance?
Oh yeah, well they're just kind of sitting around waiting for the battle to take place.
Yeah, I'm starting to think there's a very different northern perspective and southern perspective in these depictions. It's very interesting.
And then here's a famous quote from The Life in the Army. Soldiering is 99% boredom, meaning the daily camp life, and 1% sheer terror, meaning the fighting in the battles. And so his later works don't focus on the battles. They focus almost exclusively on this camp life. And he's following the different soldiers around the encampments, mostly in the Eastern theater, like Virginia and Maryland and places like that. Here's the Briarwood Pipe at the Cleveland Museum of Art. And these soldiers are Zouaves, wondering about their colorful uniforms. Oops. Here's one where they're playing a leisurely game of horseshoe type activity. This is at the Harvard University Art Museum, also known as the Fogg Museum. This is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Rainy Day in Camp from 1871. So he does make quite a few of the Civil War paintings after the war actually ended in 1865. There was somewhat of a demand for veterans and various individuals to have these kind of depictions as a reminder of their time in the Civil War. This is an interesting one. This is at the Yale University Art Gallery in Massachusetts. It's called In Front of Yorktown. And he worked on this over an extended period of time. So these are soldiers that are what's called picket duty. And so what they're doing is they have the main body of soldiers, but then they have what are called pickets kind of surrounding the soldiers, extending out a little ways. So if they're attacked, the pickets will kind of alert the rest of the soldiers that danger is on the way. So this is an extremely challenging position to be in. It was extremely dangerous. If there's an attack, these guys are going to be the first ones that are probably killed. So interesting in that regard. And then it's also interesting that this is really kind of like a voyeuristic type of view. Because,
And offer a correction on this slide.
oh, sure. Hmm.
Yale University Art Center is in Connecticut.
Oh, sorry about that. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, chime in with any corrections as
Well,
necessary.
they would be highly offended if they thought you thought they were part of Harvard.
Exactly.
Well,
I've
usually
been,
what I do is I just copy the slides over and I just change the information out. So every once in a while I forget to change the state.
That's all right. I just
So anyway, this is kind of like a voyeuristic type of view as we're looking in on these soldiers. Particularly, it's got this big tree right in the middle of the painting. So it's almost like we're spying these soldiers or looking up at them while they're on their picket duty one evening. And you can see the embers from the fire burning.
what are those things hanging from trees on toward the right side and off the roof?
Oh, so this is a shelter. So these are logs, and then they would put,
Bells,
branches and stuff over it to protect it from like the rain and stuff.
but it looks like some kind of copper metallic stuff, like some kind of an alarm system or something.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not following. You mean like right here?
Yeah, it seems like it's like almost bells strung together, the way if you follow it up the support on the side and across the top of the shelter.
if you
Well, no, I think it's just cut logs.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, now I can see that.
Hmm.
Just wasn't hitting my vision right.
Oh no, that's fine. It's all good. This is at my former employer, the Detroit Institute of Arts. This is Defiance inviting a shot before Petersburg. So, Homer didn't actually see this event from this perspective because he was on the Union side, and this particular painting is for a depiction of the Confederate side. But what you have here is this is the trench where they're hiding behind Petersburg was a siege between Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee that took place from June of 1864 to March of 1865. And the soldiers were very restless. And so this particular guy has climbed out from above the trenches and he's daring the Union soldiers to shoot at him. Now, he's thinking the soldiers that they're too far away to hit him. But that being said, kind of an interesting activity taking place here. And then here he is. And then this is one of the more noteworthy Civil War paintings, not just by Homer, but just American artists in general. This is called Prisoners from the Front. It's from 1866. It's a very iconic Civil War painting. At this point in time, in this particular battle, the Union has been victorious, and they are accepting these prisoners that have come to their attention, so to speak. But it's an interesting painting because both sides are very resolute, both the Confederate and the Union side, which you'll get more of a chance to see when I zoom in. And then one of my favorite art historians is the late Robert Hughes. And about this painting, he said, Homer's work remains the most truthful record of the Civil War outside of photography.
And this scene is actually duplicated in the Gettysburg movie.
Yep, it is. Well, we'll talk about that in just a moment. And then here's another commentary on it. It says the most telling of all paintings about the Civil War. And here's a full view. So what you have here is there are three prisoners here, Confederate prisoners, and you see they're being guarded by these Union soldiers, and they've been taken to this camp. Their rifles or somebody's rifles are down here, and then they're interacting with this Union officer here with this long sword. And there's a famous photo that you may have seen by Matthew Brady. It's one of the more famous photographs of the Civil War. It's called Three Confederate Prisoners. It was taken in 1863, and you can see a lot of similarities between the Brady photo and the Homer painting. And people have always wondered if maybe one inspired the other.
Was
So,
that Brady photo taken at Sharpsburg?
I don't remember the exact battle that he took that at, but it was in 1863. And so, again, Brady's photo is on the left, and then 3 years later, Homer paints his famous painting, which is on the right. And then we were talking about the Gettysburg film. We're actually going to be streaming it again on
Ooh,
Wednesday, July 2nd, and Thursday, July 3rd. So you can be on the lookout for that. I think this is like the third maybe year we've streamed it, or maybe even the fourth year. It's a great film. It's a long film,
powerful.
so we have to do
Yeah.
it over 2 parts. What's that, Patty?
It's powerful every time. I mean, that especially the second part, it just never gets old. I can't breathe during that whole major scene in that second half.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
mean,
so it's a great movie. It's one you can see more than once.
yeah, I catch myself holding my breath during so much of that long march.
So anyway, we'll be streaming that on Wednesday, July 2nd and Thursday, July 3rd. And there's a scene in the film where there's these three Confederate prisoners that have surrendered. And it's really a recreation of this famous painting. They'd really kind of be astute and observing carefully to catch on it. But here's a screenshot from the film. You have the three soldiers, and they're being guarded by the Union soldiers, which is the same thing here. And then you have the officers. So not quite exactly 100% the same thing, but very, very similar.
But he caught the detail of the one, only one of those Confederate soldiers is wearing a uniform. The other two are clearly not of the same class, and they're just sort of slogging along with what they've got.
Hmm. Yeah,
That
which
that
was pretty
sort of
common back
highlights.
then.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, which was pretty common back then.
More so in the South. That it highlights one of the basic factors in the war.
And then because this is such a well-known Civil War painting, it's a little bit different perspective than what you usually see in American art up to this point in time. Usually the battle type paintings or the war type paintings um, usually tend to focus on the people leading the charge, so to speak. So this is the most famous painting, the American Revolution. It's Washington crossing the Delaware, featuring, of course, the Commander-in-Chief, George Washington. This is another famous Civil War painting that's at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And this is Ulysses S. Grant. This is a fictitious depiction, but it's essentially Grant and his leadership team charging forward on their horses. And so, again, you have the leadership being shown in these two works. And here, even though this guy's an officer, he's not one of the high ranking members of the Union Army, and then the rest of the people are just kind of regular everyday troops. A little bit of a contrast there that's not showing high ranking individuals on the army or the military. And then number two, it's not actually a battle scene, it's after the battle's taken place. So interesting compare and contrast there.
Showing the humanity, which is something he has in common with Bingham.
Yeah, the humanity, that's a great way to put it. And then we don't know the identity of most of these people. We do know the identity of this gentleman. He was actually a friend of Winslow Homer's. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Painted in his New York studio after the war, this work was inspired by the heroism of Homer's friend, Francis Channing Barlow, a Union Army general who captured a division of Confederate soldiers at Spotsylvania, Virginia in 1864. The artist summarized their confrontation against a ruined Southern landscape while also implying class differences between the elegant officer in his sharp uniform and the disheveled Confederate troops. In 1869, critic Eugene Benson suggested that the painting transcended a specific event to portray the entirety of the war. So here's Barlow, a photo of him on the right. And again, he's friends with the artist Winslow Homer. They were both from New England.
Did he survive the war? Do we know?
I believe so,
Okay.
but I'm not 100% sure.
No, just curious.
And then Homer ends up doing a lot of preparatory sketches. So he can't make a painting like this at the battlefield. And even if he could, he did this particular work after the war was over. But you can see he's made sketches. So here's a sketch of his friend, the officer. Here's sketches of some troops with horses. This is the battlefield that's been devastated. All the trees have been cut down and the landscape's been scarred. And then here's the three individuals that surrendered. And then later on, he puts them all together.
The processes are interesting. Even looking at the sketch he was where he changed the general's hat.
Mm-hmm.
See how he sketched it in one way and then he kind of said,
Yeah.
make it a little sharper.
Yeah, that's why it's fascinating to look at these preparatory works because
Yeah.
sometimes artists will change things. I mean, even
Yeah.
this is not exactly the same because you can see this gentleman's
Exactly.
got a hat on.
Yeah. And I don't see a uniformed officer in that sketch. The painting does, but the sketch doesn't show the unit. Oh, look, there's a vague guy back there. I just
Yeah,
noticed.
well, yeah, he's another Union soldier.
Oh.
So yeah, if you look at the expression on their faces, though, they're somewhat defiant for people that have surrendered to the opponent. And they're standing there, very poised, so to speak, and three different types of individuals.
I'm curious. Someone just asked a question, and I think it was a serious question, but asking if the Union had cut down the trees and prepared the site for battle. No, those trees were blasted to death.
Well, it would depend. I mean, they would need trees for shelter or firewood and things like that.
But
So it
those
just
ragged
really kind of
stumps he
depends.
was showing those ragged stumps he was showing, I think, were the result of the battle.
Yeah, it really depends on just what the situation was. But anyway, let's get back to the painting. So then again, here's the full view. So one of the more well-known paintings of the Civil War, and it's done by Winslow Homer. All right, so this is Homer's Civil War era. Patty and Brad, any thoughts about Homer in the Civil War?
No, just that the more I look at these, and especially after seeing Caleb's yesterday, Caleb Bingham. Is it Bingham Caleb? Or I
George
keep
Caleb Bingham.
Caleb Bingham. Okay. There definitely is a slightly different sensibility in the Winslow ones, and he's a northerner. And Bingham's are, it's just a different kind of approach, but both are highlighting the humanity.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, that is a really excellent observation. I haven't thought about in those terms, but that makes perfect
If you
sense.
look at the map that you showed in the beginning, like that whole New England, New York area is a very tiny concentrated area. And there was a lot of Northern thinking concentrated in that small section. Whereas the South and gradually the what we now think of as the Midwest were much more recently settled and open. So it's really, it sort of conveys the different sensibility, I think.
Mm-hmm. Brad, what about you? Any thoughts on Winslow Homer in the Civil War?
Well, so far, I've seen soldiers either in a tree or standing in a field. I agree with you, not showing the battles. And, it's kind of funny because he was sent to cover the war,
Oops.
but showing how they lived in the army to me seems important as showing how they fought. I mean, it's important, the results of some of those battles, but the blood and guts part of it, showing that probably is showing his humanity.
Yeah, that's why I like that quote from Shelby Foote.
Yeah.
That really captures the significance of the Civil War in
Now, is
terms of our historic evolution.
one of his illustrations.
Yeah, so this is an illustration. So initially, early on in the war, he is doing these depictions of battles because again, they had photographs at this point in time, but they had to be still photos. You couldn't have capture moving action and stuff. And so he's drawing these, or they're turning into engravings and then putting these in the the periodical, so to speak. So he did do these scenes initially. It's just eventually he really just moves away from that, and then he's covering all the camp life stuff. So just kind of an interesting transition. You kind of have to wonder what was the reason behind that or the cause of that. Because when you think of Civil War and battles, you think of all the fighting and all that kind of stuff taking place.
Well, the horrors and deprivations of war kind of force a population into a self-awareness that we don't bother with a lot of times when things are going well.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So I can see why that all that horrific battle, and remember how many people came home missing limbs and stuff. I can see why both of these people would have turned to highlighting the specific human bodies and faces to think about ourselves as people.
Oh yeah, well that's especially evident when you turn to the next chapter and look at Homer's paintings that he made after the Civil War. So initially, right after the Civil War, he does do paintings of the war for a little while. I think partially just to support himself because he's a professional artist and there was a demand for that. But he really focuses on a lot of different types of things, including American leisure. So he's doing these scenes that really have nothing to do with the Civil War. They're very far removed. It's almost like we've turned the page and forgotten there was even a war take place. So this is at the Art Institute Chicago. It's called Croquet Scene from 1866. Croquet was a sport that became popular during this time. It was imported from England, where it was very popular there. Um, and one reason why it was really popular was because it was one of the few social activities that men could and women could do in kind of like a co-ed type of activity. And so usually in this era, if you were single, you stayed with your same gender. But in this game, croquet, men and women could play with each other. So it was a chance for people to kind of court, so to speak, or flirt with one another. So it becomes really popular. And Homer does this whole series of croquet scenes. This is 1866. It's only a year after the war is over. And he does a whole number of these paintings of croquet. And now, if you can kind of think about this and compare it to all the other famous paintings you've seen of croquet by, Monet and Van Gogh. No, I'm just kidding. There's not really a lot of people depicting croquet, but Homer is. And I think he did like 10 or 12 of these paintings. We're only going to see a few of them. And here's some women that are sitting and standing on a porch, and you can see the croquet apparatus in the background. And then kind of shifting gears, this is 1869, Long Branch, New Jersey, which is along the shore. You have a group of people, looks like they're having some type of social event. Just a historical footnote, Long Branch, New Jersey is where President Garfield passed away in 1881, so 12 years after this painting was done. And I really like this work a lot. The clothes are really interesting, and the sunlight and the water in the distance.
In these, he's focusing as it's he seems to be focusing on a middle class, a definite, not definitely not a working class.
Yeah, yeah, I would say these are probably upper middle class people. I don't think they're millionaires per se, but yeah, they're not,
Mhm.
um, you know,
They're the weller off.
yeah. And then here's a similar type work. This is at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. This is East Hampton Beach in Long Island, also known as the Hamptons. And again, the focus on post-Civil War leisure. And you can see this is a nice beach scene. So again, really no hint that we just ended the most violent military activity that had taken place in the hemisphere. It's like we've turned the page and kind of focusing on life getting back to normal. Now, of course, that's not all Homer doing that. I think the country in general, there was a fair amount of people wanting desire to kind of put that behind them and move forward.
Also helps that he was based in the North and not in the South.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a good point. Although he did travel to the South, and we'll actually look at some paintings that he did of the Reconstruction era. So that's a great point,
There
Patty.
wouldn't be any Civil War scars in this particular area of the country.
Oh yeah,
Didn't there was no battles on Long Island.
yeah. Right. Well, I don't think there were any in New Jersey.
I think there was a tiny little one in Vermont.
Yeah, some folks came down from Canada. and took
Like a
about that.
side meal or something, yeah.
So one of the things that Homer is known for is his depictions. He's known for many different subjects, the Civil War and his depictions of children, which we'll see later, and the ocean, and seafaring life, which we'll see later. But he's also known for doing depictions of rural life, and it's really kind of a response to the industrialization and the urbanization that has taken place at this point in time in America. And so, if you look at Homer's life, when he began his art career in 1860, only about 18% of the, or sorry, he actually began his career in 1855. Only about 18% of the people were living in cities. But by the time Homer dies in 1910, a huge number of people have flocked to the cities, 45%. So pretty much less than 1 out of 5 people living in the cities when Homer starts his career, and almost half, though, when he ends up finally passing away in 1910. So there's a big shift in the United States population away from the farms and rural areas to big cities, places like New York and Chicago and Philadelphia and stuff like that.
If I'm remembering correctly, that has been a pattern over the rough, three going on 3 centuries of American history, is that we tend to have a lot of massive development toward the ends of centuries, and then the beginning of the next one is kind of a reaction, and then it repeats again. The second half of a century is extreme development or change.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Interesting.
people still moving towards the cities. Let's see. So here's an interesting painting. Note the date on it, 1864. And this is at the Columbus Museum of Art in Ohio. And again, kind of highlighting some of these museums. The Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Art Institute of Chicago are great and stuff, but there's a lot of incredible art all over the country. And so hopefully you can get a chance to see some of these works close in person at some point in time. But again, note the date on this painting, 1864. The Civil War is still taking place. It didn't end until the following year. This work is called Haymaking. Now, the men are all off fighting in the war, so to speak. But yet you have this young man here. He looks like a teenager and he's doing the farm work. So it's an interesting contrast that it's a teenager doing the work, supposed to say a full-grown man. And then also just the composition. It's a sunny day. It's a very calm setting versus the distant war and fighting and death taking place on in the battlefields across the country at this point in time.
And this would have been extremely backbreaking work without any kind of mechanization at all.
Oh yeah, farming, tough way to make a living.
Well, even just turning hay, and I mean that it looks nice and light because it's grass, but it's heavy when you're dealing with large amounts of it.
And all day long.
Yeah, exactly. And this is
Mhm.
after you had to cut it and then, turn it, and you have to turn it a couple of times to dry it out properly.
Yeah, and they haven't even invented Gatorade at this point in time. I mean,
No.
or air conditioning, so probably hot out. But anyway, it's a nice,
No
touching
ice,
scene.
no iced tea even.
Yeah, no iced tea even, really.
The girls came out with the buckets and the dippers.
Yeah, with the milk, we're actually going to see a painting of that in a little bit. This is one of his most famous post-Civil War paintings. This one actually does have a little bit of a Civil War connection to it, and this is actually one of the more well-known works just in American art in general. If you had to make a list of what are the most famous paintings that have been ever made in the history of the United States, or most famous paintings from the 1800s, this one would be on that list. It's called "The Veteran in a New Field." It's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It was done in 1865, shortly after the war ended. And what you have going on here is a farmer, and he's cutting wheat. And it might be hard to see in the smaller version, but I'll give you a full view in just a moment. He's got a jacket here, a Union Army jacket, and a canteen over here. So another sign that he's a veteran. And here's the soldier. And you can see here's his navy blue jacket and his canteen. Now, during the Civil War, there was a huge increase in the amount of mechanization that takes place in agriculture because, as Patty was just mentioning, this is very backbreaking work. It's extremely labor intensive. They just don't have the labor because most able bodied men are all off fighting or they're doing, other war-related activities. And so there was a strong push towards mechanizing a lot of agriculture. It didn't completely automate things, but there was a big giant step forward at this point in time. So here's an example of a implement over here. But that being said, a lot of people, particularly if they had their own small farm, still had to do all the work by hand, which is what's taking place here. And of course, the famous line from the Bible, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares.
There does tend to be a wave of advancement and mechanization after wars anyway, because so much technology has gone into fighting the war that then that technology becomes adaptable to other things.
Oh yeah, yeah, throughout history.
Computers, for example.
And then it's always interesting to kind of look for symbolism in art. So,
Was that the
so
Grim Reaper behind that? Or
yeah, the Grim Reaper, right? Exactly. And so, you have to kind of wonder, was that the farm implement that he's using?
it's
He's not
called
using
a
a
scythe.
pitchfork. What's that?
I believe it's called a scythe.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't think that's not a straightforward scythe. You'd see these in museums up around here all the time. That is much bigger than it looks. That's why it actually loops around his body.
Yep.
Because that there's a number of tines off of that. It's much bigger than, say, a regular pitchfork, and it sort of threshes while it's cutting. It's a huge tool. I can't imagine trying to wield that.
hmm So yeah, it's a cutting tool, and so some people have kind of wondered, like, well, gee, it's interesting that Homer chose this implement to depict as opposed to, like, say, just a regular pitchfork or a shovel or something like that.
You can actually see the tines if you look closely.
Yeah, the horizontally.
And see how it hooks around his back, but it's also got two handles in the front. So his whole body is doing that work. It's an
Yeah, and
amazing.
it's almost looks like he's holding a weed whip, but,
Yeah.
but of course it's not a weed whip. But anyway, there's the connotations between the Grim Reaper and these different tools and things like that. And then interesting enough, during the Civil War, many battles were fought in wheat fields. So maybe that's just an accident that he's out in a wheat field, or maybe it's um, memory back to the war for Homer. And then a lot of people thought about, well, agriculture, you're talking about the circle of life as well.
Definitely. Yeah, see the tines?
hmm
And that's wood. That's made out of wood. That is one big thing. I don't know if you can really picture how big that really is. Like I said, I've seen them over and over again in museums. So it's just an amazing tool. I literally cannot imagine. See, it's so heavy that it even has a part for his left arm to rest, like an arm rest on it. That's how big it is.
hmm
That's got to hurt after a day's work.
Oh yeah, tough way to make a living. And then again, here's his jacket and his canteen. And again, the title of this painting is Veteran in a New Field.
I'm not sure if that thing on his back is part of his tool or
Yeah, you're right, but it does have a hook on the back. I just know from having seen them. It literally harnesses the whole body into the work.
Mhm. Um, so yeah, so anyway, it's the title of the painting is called Veteran in a New Field. He's got his jacket here and his canteen. So he's come home from the war. Not sure what was going on with his farm while he was gone, but now he's back and he's going to be the one to take care of all this stuff. And so kind of sort of like a Civil War painting, but kind of sort of like also post Civil War as well.
he came home and his wife told him to go out and cut the grass.
Yeah, I'm getting tired of doing the stuff by myself. And then, hey, maybe this is his wife. So this is at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. This is called the dinner horn, or blowing the horn at Seaside. This is from 1870. So usually what would happen in this era is, you go out in the morning and you're working and it comes time for lunch. Well, how are you going to know what time lunch is? Because, what are they going to send you a text message that lunch is ready, that the pizza's been delivered? And, some people had watches, but not everybody, particularly people working out in the fields. So the women of the house would come out and blow these horns as kind of a message or a signal that, hey, the lunch is ready. And then, of course, they would come back in the house and have a nice meal, and then turn around and go back off and do the work. And so Homer actually did a few different versions of this same type of subject matter, a woman blowing a horn to the workers out there yonder ways.
Yeah, and this one I think it says seaside, but it would be the same thing. They'd be at the shipyards or the fishery.
And then here's another one. Well, I don't know if a woman would eat down at the shipyard, so I think it's more of an
Yeah.
agricultural type setting.
I think the
This,
other one said it was at the seaside.
well, no, it did, but I don't think you're going to have women working at the shipyards. And
No,
these
no,
other versions of this,
he's calling to them from a distance.
well, no, I understand that, but he's done several different versions of these paintings, and they look like they're mostly like an agricultural type setting. Maybe it could be the shipyard. I don't know. It's just it seems like they're usually in like an agricultural type setting. But anyway, here's a different version. It's at the Detroit Institute of Arts, 1873, the dinner horn. And he did a few other versions. I think there's four of these or five different versions. We were only having a chance to look at two of them. And then here's an interesting one. This is the Baltimore Museum of Art. It's called Waiting an Answer from 1872. Waiting an answer for what? We don't know. So maybe it's like some kind of 19th century courtship thing. So here's a guy, he's also got this kind of similar type farm implement. And then there's a woman standing there looking down. And this looks like pretty tense scene here. So I don't know. What do you think's going on here, Patty? Any indication or ideas?
I think they're probably young and they're shy because they wouldn't have a chance to spend much time together alone in this era. So this would be like a rare occasion. She might have just brought something out to him, or she might have been walking by. But yeah, I don't think you would have seen girls, out in the fields that often. So it's probably just a kind of shy little courtshipy thing.
Maybe she's coming out to ask him why he didn't come when she blew the dinner horn. Like,
Okay,
well,
I
I'm
was
busy. I got all this work to do. Yeah, I know. I made an apple pie.
I mean that's what he's good at. He's giving us just little hints of life after the war.
Hmm. Yeah, these kind of slices of life, so to speak.
Yeah.
Here's a pretty painting. This one's in a private collection. It's called Morning Glories from 1873. And again, so you're seeing a kind of theme here over and over again, where he's doing all these different depictions of rural America. He's not showing you these city scenes or urban scenes, these people out on farms and things like that. See a woman sitting in a window. And it looks like she's holding a branch of a flower, or maybe even a tree or a vine or something.
I think it said morning glories, didn't it? Morning glories. Yeah. Oh, morning glories. They climb.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, that makes sense. Well, thank you, Patty. Appreciate that. Let's see. So yeah, there's a close up. And who knows, maybe it was the woman that was waiting for the answer. I don't know.
And it's like the theme of reverie. Now there's time for reverie. It's life isn't grim.
Oh yeah, that is a good point, the reverie angle.
Yeah.
And then we were talking about, getting thirsty when you're out doing the work. This is at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, a temperance meeting from 1874. The temperance movement was popular during this time. And so, probably what she's doing here, she's probably delivering milk. And so, farm, they have different agricultural endeavors. Perhaps they have some cows, and maybe the cow's been milked, and she's bringing it out to the workers to um, keep them hydrated so they can continue working. Because not everybody can listen to the dinner horn and come out and get things.
Yeah, and you didn't waste a lot of energy trekking back and forth to the buildings.
Yeah. So another kind of interesting I don't know what you'd call it, the composition, the way they're standing and interacting with each other.
Bucolic life.
Yeah. Like you could caption this one. So how did you how did you meet dad again? Oh, I used to bring him milk out in the field.
Well, you gotta keep remembering, Robert. See, I grew up with all of this, including the farm. So I'm used to seeing New England. I'm used to seeing these tools. I'm used to seeing all this stuff. So I actually have my own narratives that happen with each of these paintings.
Oh, I see. Well, that's good because we don't have as much of this stuff in Detroit where I'm from. So
Well, exactly.
appreciate your insight,
New
firsthand
England,
knowledge.
New England is a very concentrated area. That's why I like to point that out on the map sometimes because it's just so different from so much of the rest of the country.
Hmm. And then this is the Chrysler Museum of Art in Norfolk. This is a great museum in southeastern Virginia. I used to live not far from here many years ago. Farmer with a Pitchfork from around 1874. And it's thought that because of the position of the sunlight that it's early evening. And so when I look at this painting, I kind of wonder, is he looking at what he's accomplished for the day and thinking, oh, okay, I did a good job? Or is he looking at,
Really?
oh my God, I have so
Yes.
much more stuff I have to do tomorrow?
No. Like look at the size of those stacks. And now remember, he's turned this hay, he's cut this hay, he's turned it over several times, he's got it into these stacks. That's a lot of work. And yeah, you would want to sit and look at that for a minute or two before heading off to bed.
And then there's your favorite color, red.
Exactly.
So yeah, like sometimes if you work out in the yard, when you get all done, you're stopped like, okay, whew, boy, I really got a lot done today. Or then other times like, oh my God, I got so much more I got to do tomorrow. So, or maybe both.
Yeah, I don't know if that sense of constant pressure. I mean, yes, there was a schedule you had to keep, but that sense of constant pressure is much more urbanized culture. It's not so much this because by this time you're really tired and you're also kind of obeying the rhythms of the day. So yeah, it's getting dark. Soon he's going to be going to bed.
Polly says also straightening his back and shoulders, and it could be as
Exactly.
well.
With the pitchfork, exactly. With the handle, yeah.
And this is called Song of the Lark. It's another sunset scene, and the lark is a bird. So perhaps he's listening to the bird or birds, and he's got another farm implement in his hand.
Yeah, see, Brad, what I mean about that curve at the end of the handle? That's where it goes around the body.
Yeah, we had one of those in our garage we had a bunch of old farm tools from in our garage, and that was one of them. And boy, that thing was heavy. I mean,
Yeah.
if you spend a day swinging that thing, you're going to know it that night.
Now, this one is a little bit different. So, this is the New Britain Museum of American Art in Connecticut, and it's called Butterflies from 1878. So, Homer took a little bit of a detour career wise, and he starts doing several depictions of really elegantly dressed young women out in kind of nature scenes. So, this is the only one I'm going to be showing. But if you like this kind of artwork, I did a whole series of these, several different paintings over the extended period of time. And so the thought here is he's depicting the beauty of both the woman and the nature. This is what was common during this time known as the aesthetic movement. So there's not a like a moral message here, like some of the paintings that we saw, like maybe the soldiers surrendering or the guy that was out in the field, the veteran. Maybe there's kind of some hidden meaning to that. That's not really the case here. He's strictly just making art for art's sake, so to speak. And he's capturing the beauty of this woman in this nature setting. And if you look closely, she's has a butterfly in her hand. I'll zoom in just a moment. But these are unusual to me in the sense that if I saw this painting for the first time, I wouldn't necessarily guess it was a Winslow Homer painting. I mean, I can kind of sort of see it just be the style of it, but the subject matter is very different than he's usually doing. But he did kind of explore a lot of different types of things in his career, including this one.
And it has a very modern look to it for Homer.
Yeah, it sure does. I mean, when you consider how old it is.
Oh, Ellen's pointing out that the dress mimics the butterflies. The butterflies are black.
I didn't think about that, but yeah, you're right. Good
You know,
observation. So yeah, after she, blew the dinner horn and delivered the milk, she got dressed up and went out to look for butterflies.
I think this lady might be a little bit of a cross. But also, you had that. This was when the idea of personal advancement was starting to flower in this country beyond a certain very
Oh yeah.
select group.
Oh, okay. So what do you think? We
Lepidoptery.
ended the Civil War. We're looking at all these pictures of life out on the farm and all that kind of stuff, and it's very different than remember in the beginning I showed you that slide of the people are moving to the cities and the industrialization and all that stuff, and this is a very different type of setting than those. Any thoughts on the rural life by Winslow Homer?
Well, like I said, to me, he's like a very New England. It's a very New England sensibility, and I'm very aware of him as a New England painter. Somebody just asked an interesting question, though, and this kind of highlights it. The one on the right, I think, is what inspired the question. Was he influenced by the Impressionists? Because you can sort of see some Impressionist style in that right hand one.
Yeah, he was, although the Impressionism doesn't really get started until like 1873, and it takes a long time before it gets over to America. So you can kind of see that with a little bit later works, but at this point in time, no one in America would have ever even heard of Impressionism. But hold that thought. We'll see that a little bit later.
Definitely
Brad, any
have a
thoughts about what's that?
more modern sensibility in that right one.
hmm Brad, any thoughts on Winslow Homer and the rural life?
I agree with Patty. It's definitely New England type of sensibility to the farm. And while the men are out cutting the wheat, she would go out hunting butterflies. It's possible.
Yeah, and there's a second one up here. She's
Yeah.
already got one. She wants another one.
Yeah. Someone just made the point that yes, this collecting was one of the few quote unquote higher learning activities available to a lot of women at this time. So yeah, that's part of
Mhm.
why these sorts of things became popular.
Yeah, thanks, Polly. Appreciate that. Lynn says more sophisticated. All right, let's continue on. Another subject matter or genre you could say that Homer is known for is depiction of children, which is really noteworthy because Homer didn't have any children that we know of. He was never married. And if you think about the two people, two American artists that are the most famous depictors of children, one is Mary Cassatt and the other is Winslow Homer. Yet neither one of them had children or had ever married. So kind of unusual in that regard. And who knows, maybe that was one of the things that motivated them to do depictions of children. More people tend to think, though, that after the Civil War, children are really kind of seen as innocent, and they're the next generation, and they're the ones that are going to carry the country forward, and all that kind of stuff. So this is Girls in a Landscape from
Oh, it
18.
occurs to me, Robert, that people without children might actually be more objective depictors of children.
Oh yeah, sure. So you have three girls sitting here. They're looking at some flowers. And then there's a similar painting that we'll see in just a moment. It's three girls and a lobster. And this is at the Cleveland Museum of Art. It's called A Fisherman's Daughter. And so here was the previous one, Three Girls with the Flowers. And it looks like the same three girls, except the one in the middle has a lobster. It's called Fisherman's Daughter. So perhaps her father is a fisherman. Maybe she's explaining the inner workings of the lobster. And then I really like this painting a lot. It's called St. Louis. Well, it's at the St. Louis Art Museum. Sorry. It's called The Country School. It's from 1871. And it has a really lot of subjects that are important to America at this point in time. First of all, you have the rural life. We've talked about that versus the urbanization. The one-room schools are so iconic in American history. And then, of course, children and the childhood that you see evident after the Civil War in all different types of art, not just paintings. And so you have a woman here. Most teachers in this era were women, and she's holding court over her class of different individuals in this one room schoolhouse. And it looks very New Englandy. In the 1800s, teaching became a predominantly female occupation, particularly in primary and secondary education, due to various economic, social, and cultural factors. Women often took on these roles due to limited employment opportunities and were generally paid less than male teachers. While initially seen as a temporary or pre-marriage profession, teaching offered women a sense of purpose and independence, contributing to their growing presence in the educational landscape. So prior to the Civil War, you don't have as many women working outside of the home. And so teaching really becomes an avenue for women to get more, say, independence. They can move away from home sometimes, not always, but sometimes, earn their own money, make their own decisions, and things like that. And again, interesting that she's front and center in the painting. And it has a lot of really interesting touches to this. So you can see her hat in the background. I'll zoom in just a moment. And then there's a chalkboard, and there's even some flowers. Not sure if she picked those herself or if her students gave those to her. And it has this really warm light washing the painting. And it kind of has a nostalgic type of view. And you see Homer making paintings like this over and over again for years of these kind of innocent children in these rural environments.
That's another reason why that butterfly one is so distinct. This color palette seems to be one of his favorites.
Yeah, it's more kind of an earthy type of color.
That reddish, orangish tone. That's probably another reason why you wouldn't immediately think Homer when you saw that butterfly one.
Yeah, so the barefoot students and the teacher's bonnet. Some students facing towards her, some facing away. Here's the flowers on her desk.
These really were common right into the probably at least mid 1800s, because a lot of the early schools that many people in my generation went to were built in the late 1800s.
Well, yeah, and out west, one room schools continued well on into the 1900s
Yeah,
in
no,
a
I'm
lot
talking
of
about
rural places.
yeah. I mean, these are obviously New England, so yeah.
So again, the one room school is kind of a classic kind of American um, um, institution, so to speak. I mean, other countries have one room schools as well, but it's really kind of part of the whole kind of educational nostalgia, so to speak. This painting's at the Amon Carter Museum of American Art in Fort Worth, Texas, Crossing the Pasture, another depiction of post-Civil War America. So again, the Civil War ends in 1865. So 6 or 7 years afterwards, you have these country boys, which is a popular theme. And there's been a lot of um, discussion and writing about the subject matter here and this kind of lost innocence that the children of this era have compared to like the Civil War, and then also the nostalgia against the coming in urbanization and industrialization. So you have two boys, an older one and a younger one. Looks like the younger one is somewhat kind of protected by the older boy, and they're astutely looking at something off in the distance. This also has a very New Englandy kind of scene, right, Patty? Because of the hills and things like that. That's
Yeah, that's
definitely not the Detroit area, which
one
is
of the
very
big
quiet.
challenges in
What's
New
that?
England.
What's that?
The big challenges in farming in New England are the massive hills everywhere and the glacial soil that it like grows rocks spontaneous.
Hmm.
There are so many rocks in these. That's why you've got um, stone walls everywhere in New England.
Hmm. Oh, here's an interesting comment from Bev talking about the previous painting. My husband went to the last one-room schoolhouse in Iowa in elementary school, and he was born in 1950. So there you have it. Still into the 1900s, people using the one-room school. And then so this whole idea of children and this, the future of America and this innocence, they haven't been scarred by the Civil War. It's not just with Homer, not even just with painting, it's in all different types of art. So if you look at this, Little Women came out in 1868. This particular painting was made 1871, 1872, and of course Homer's doing all these different types of depictions of children, and then Tom Sawyer, that came out in 1876. So it's not just a visual arts type of thing. The literary arts as well are capturing this idea. I mean, Little Women and Tom Sawyer, two of the most famous works, written works of the 1800s. And interestingly enough, they're both done around the same time that these Homer paintings of children were created. They're carrying a pail. Not sure what's in the pail. And then this is one of Homer's more famous works. It's actually two very similar works. Not to say that one is more well known than the other, but they're kind of used interchangeably. But these are two different paintings at two different museums that are essentially the same subject matter. So this one is at the Butler Institute of American Art. It's called Snap the Whip from 1872. Snap the Whip was a children's game. And again, more post Civil War children, kind of the innocence of children and childhood. And they also represent the future. And then there's a similar version, a later version, also called Snap the Whip, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. They might be wondering, why did he make two paintings that are so similar? As I mentioned yesterday, and in several other programs, artists, painters, sculptors, they're just like Hollywood movie producers and directors. If they have a hit, they'll go and do a sequel. And so that's what takes place here. So he made this painting first. It's got the hills of New England in it. It's these boys, they're outside the one-room schoolhouse, and they're playing the Snap the Whip game. And this was a very successful, popular painting for him. Homer was not a starving artist by any means. He was very successful. He's selling a number of his paintings. He's easily supporting himself as a full-time artist. So this one was a very popular depiction. So then he decides to go and make a similar version, although he kind of I don't know what you would call it. He got rid of kind of like the New England aspect of it because, outside of New England, there's only so many places that have hills. And so this one, because it's more of a flat type of setting, maybe would have more kind of a mass appeal to people in different parts of the country. So here's the first one. And the second one is very similar, but it doesn't have the hills in it. And I'll show you a side-by-side view in just a moment. What's that, Patty?
No, I got rid of the girls, and one of the guys that had already fallen out of the whip is also missing in the second
Yeah,
one.
yeah, they're not completely the same. In the years after the America's brutal Civil War, children, as embodiments of innocence and the promise of America's future, became a popular artistic subject. Snap the Whip, one of Homer's most beloved and iconic works, evoked nostalgia for the nation's agrarian past as the population shifted to cities, and the little red schoolhouse faded from memory. Released from their lessons, the exuberant barefooted boys engage in a spirited playtime activity. An earlier, larger version of this subject is located at the Butler Institute of American Art. So this particular caption relates to the painting at the Met, the second version. The Met's version differs from the original in its background, with a wide blue sky replacing lush mountain range, making the image less regionally specific. So he's using marketing principles to appeal to a broader mass of customers. So again, first view or first painting, second painting.
The difference in tone could be partly due to where it's been hung, right? In what environment.
Oh yeah, yeah, and he's probably, I mean, using similar paints, maybe not the exact same paints either. That could have some kind of impact.
But I mean, this one is much more vivid than this one.
hmm So there's the poor boy falling down.
Getting grass stains on his knees.
I've never actually played this game. I don't know, Brad or Patty, if you have.
Yep, and other people in the audience have made remarks about it.
Oh
Oh
yeah.
I
yeah.
think snap the whip. Some places they called it crack the whip, but this was still pretty popular when I was a kid.
Anything else noteworthy about these paintings from the two of you?
Yeah, I just the idea of the regional specific. I mean, only one of these two, even though they're almost completely the same, only one of them screams New England to me, and that would be the
Hmm.
one on the left. The other one, I would just think, oh, I wonder where that is, you know?
Hmm. And then continuing on with the same subject. So, Dad's Coming from 1873. So, this boy and his sibling and his mom probably are waiting for their father to return from the ocean, probably a fisherman's family. This is at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C.
And that is much more a hit or miss proposition than I think people give it credence for.
Yeah, a lot of people went out to sea and did not come back. It was a very dangerous profession.
The oldest food banks known to exist in America go all the way back to the 1800s, maybe even 17, but they're like 200 and some odd years old.
Oh, yeah, for
Um,
this very purpose?
because so many of the coastal people made a living, um, in some aspect of the fishing industry.
Oh,
So
I
that
didn't know
even
that.
if they weren't lost, they would be gone for long periods of time. So it was just a necessity.
Yeah, I mean, think if you're, suppose your husband works on a ship and he's gone for weeks or months at a time. Well, they
Like,
get paid, there's no money coming in. I mean, they get paid when the journey is over. And so the family back home would have to somehow support themselves without the knowing the guy came back. If he came back, that'd be a different story. But
the whaling voyages like went on for more than a year.
mhm.
Yeah, somebody
Yeah,
whalers
Ellen.
years at a
Ellen says
time.
whalers could easily be gone for 2 to 3 years at a time. So yeah, I mean, how would you support yourself during those days? All
And
right, this is
that,
the
that
blue.
carries over into their architecture too. A lot of the houses that were built up there, if they were anywhere near the ocean, had a widow's walk on top so they could go up and look out to see their man coming home.
Oh yeah, the widow's walk.
That's usually the wealthier. Those would be the captains' wives and stuff, you know.
Yeah.
The closer to the shore, you would have like a mixture of all kinds of huts. Literally, here in Portsmouth, there was an area that was literally called Puddle Dock, and people would move around between the houses at high tide in boats.
Hmm. All right, this is called the Blue Boy from 1873. This is a scene in Gloucester, Massachusetts. Two boys sitting on a hill, one sitting, one standing on a hill. And again, you just see this over and over again, all these depictions of children. This is Boy with an Anchor from 1873. He's playing on the anchor, and it's probably depicting his connection to the maritime trades, but also too, perhaps this is his future or his destiny. He might end up working in this field as well.
Certainly took a certain kind of personality and vision to be able to do this, I would say.
Oh yeah. Indianapolis Museum of Art, The Boat Builders from 1873, depicting the sea and ships and fishing. This is noteworthy in that their faces are shielded. So we were talking before about how the one painting with the snap the whip, he got rid of the hills and replaced it with more of a flat surface to make it more universal. Kind of a similar thing here, perhaps. He's showing these two boys, but you can't see their faces. So that kind of does make them more universal as well.
Yeah, it's hard to make the seaside landscape more universal. I think they actually call them seascapes, don't they?
Oh yeah, but if you could see the boys' faces, usually if artists are not showing a person's face, it's for a very specific reason, oftentimes. And so if you don't show the person's face, in this particular context, it makes it more of a universal type depiction.
Oh, I
Um,
see. Yeah.
here's quote from the museum on this work. This scene pairs Homer's love of outdoor subjects with his favorite theme of boys at play and the overlapping toy boats and sailing ships connects the real world of the fishermen with the boys' imagination and perhaps also to their future destiny.
Yeah, Jeff says not a Brooklyn game.
Oh, snap the whip. Yeah, but Catherine said she played Snap the Whip in Southern California back in the 1950s. So there you go.
I didn't know if he meant the boats or the crack the whip, but
No, I
I
think
know
he meant to
little
crack the whip.
detail. I don't know if people that don't live near an ocean would notice this, but notice that red berm in the back. They've actually kind of built a little tide pool there,
Mm-hmm.
and that would be very common. Anytime there's a beach near residential places, people do that for their kids and also for there's a lot of scientific. I mean, the things that show up in tide pools are fascinating. Oh wow, Gene Hansen played Crack the Whip in, I think, Minnesota on ice skates.
Wow.
I imagine he landed on ice too.
That that would be a very painful experience.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe you'd be all padded up with your coat on.
Being-
Maybe
I'm still
depend.
thinking of the ankles though.
This is one of Homer's more well-known depictions of his children's series. This is at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston called Boys in a Pasture from 1874. Again, their faces, you're not really able to see much detail. They're averted in this particular case, so it makes the boys more universal as opposed to, say, individual. And if you have to mail some stuff out, why not use some Winslow Homer stamps? Impress your friends and family.
Oh, his stamp is from the Forever era.
Yeah. Well, there's a few. I think there's one or two other. There's two other stamps that we're going to see today. So this is a fascinating painting by Winslow Homer. It's at my former employer, the Detroit Institute of Arts. The Four-Leaf Clover from 1873. Again, another depiction of Homer's rural America, these idyllic scenes of the country life, so to speak. She's wearing this white dress, and maybe that's just a coincidence. A lot of people wore white and cream-colored clothing in this era, but also usually white is in artwork, depiction of like purity and good and all that stuff. And then flowers oftentimes represent life and rebirth. And the title of the painting, the four-leaf clovers, of course, represent good fortune. And here's
I
the full
don't know
view.
what this building is, but if you've ever seen New England barns, so many of them were built exactly like this, where the lower part was where the animals would be, and they would have windows just like that, and that part would be whitewashed, and then up above would be the clapboard finish red barns. And so our barn looked exactly like that.
Oh yeah, well that's cool. Let's see. So yeah, a woman or a young girl sitting here off to the side, and she's holding a four-leaf clover, which is the title of the painting. Which will The four-leaf clover is a rare variation of the common three-leaf clover. According to traditional sayings, such clovers bring good luck, though it is not clear when or how this idea began. The odds of finding a four-leaf clover are several thousand to one. And the window here is really unusual. This painting kind of reminds me of the one where it was the Civil War pickets at night, and they were sitting by the campfire, and there was that big giant tree right in the middle of the painting. So if you were thinking about putting a composition together, like this, and a girl outside holding a four-leaf clover, you'd probably think, well, gee, the girl should be in the center of the painting, not off to the side. And it's almost like this window, this dark window, has kind of the starring role, so to speak. And yeah, perhaps these are common in different parts of the country. But that being said, the woman is really kind of the focal point, or should be at least, of the painting. But yet she's kind of off to the side in the window, the dark window, which contrasts with the rest of the painting in terms of like the lighter colors and the sunshine and the flowers and her white dress and all that stuff. So kind of an interesting contrast between the darkness of the window and this black hole, so to speak. Some people have kind of wondered if maybe this is a kind of a Civil War lack of closure type of thing. I don't know. I mean, it sounds reasonable, but with that being said, you can often read too much into artwork, so to speak. But why is the window in the middle of the painting? I mean, who really knows? But it is in kind of an unusual pattern because usually in his other works, you see the figures more kind of centralized, so to speak. And then why is she looking off in this? I mean, it kind of looks like her head is facing the clover, but it looks like she's actually looking at the window and not because you would think if she was looking at the four-leaf clover, her head would be tilted down a little bit more. So flowers in a young girl, perhaps representing rebirth, innocence, and the future, or nostalgia for the fast disappearing rural.
Yeah,
So
somebody said get here into the building. These windows would be open all summer long because of that. And they would be closed all winter long.
mhm. And then here's the other side.
As we're looking at this, I'm thinking a lot of these barns have just, I mean, there were so many of them still around when I was younger, but so many of them have disappeared now because of the expansion of housing everywhere. A lot of these old farms were the last to be built on.
So there you go, the four-leaf clover by Winslow Homer. And then continuing on, this is the Wichita Art Museum in the Mowing from 1874. You have three boys in a meadow, and perhaps they're walking back home for dinner. Looks like they're looking off into the distance. And you can see a figure over here. Perhaps that's their father. Interesting depiction of light here. And again, notice that you can't see the boys' faces. All right, here's two similar paintings that were done around the same time, both of ships. This is called Breezing Up or A Fair Wind. It's from the 1870s, and this is a very classic Winslow Homer depiction. It's a marine genre scene. You have a fisherman and three boys. Then there's a similar painting called The Flirt from 1874. So here's the first painting, and then here's the second one, and I'll put them up side by side in just a moment. There you go. And so you pretty much have the same thing, except in this one, you have four boys, and this one you only have three. So maybe somebody fell off. I don't know. And then, and then this one has a boat off in the distance to kind of balance things. Other than that, somewhat similar.
Is he depicting a greater billow in the one with the one of them has a huge shadow in the sail and the other one is relatively shadow free, but it looks like they're both billowed about the same amount.
Yeah, so here's one. And here's the second one.
Oh no, this one is billowed out, I think, a little bit more.
Yeah, Raven pointed out this one says The Flirt on the back, and this one does not.
This one says Gloucester.
Yeah.
This is the one that was in that intro video.
Yeah.
Mhm. And this one also was a stamp, although quite a while ago, back in the day when stamps were only 4 cents.
And some of us can remember then.
um, but again, to keep going back in this theme, this post-war nostalgia for this kind of simpler, more innocent America. Um, Everyone's kind of leaning to one side of the ship because if you're ever been on a sailboat, if it catches the wind a certain way, it can easily tip over. So you have to use your body weight to kind of keep things balance, so to speak, or the equilibrium. It's interesting though that he has this kind of diagonal movement with the sail and the boat.
Yeah, there's an energy, there's a sense of energy, even in the one that's, well, one looks calmer, the ocean, but there's a sense of energy in both of them.
Hmm.
You're right, Francine. Some of us even remember the penny
Oh, the penny
postcard.
postcard.
Now that's really thinking back.
Penny candies. Yeah, they used to have all kinds of penny stuff.
Bread.
I went to my penny candy store on
Yeah,
weekends for years.
penny candy, penny postcards. Pennies actually were worth something. And then
Hmm.
now they cost money to make.
And then let's see, this one you can see there's a bunch of fish in the boat. So they've obviously been out fishing.
Whereas the flirt's just out sailing for sailing's sake.
So again, this reminds me of the painting of the Snap the Whip, where there's two very similar versions, and he's just kind of tweaking some things here and there. Here's another one that's two similar type of depictions. This is at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Arkansas, a great museum that was founded by the Walton family of Walmart fame. It's called Spring. It's done in 1878, and there's this young boy and young girl, and they're separated by this fence. And then this contraption here is called a stile. It would allow you to step over the fence, but the fence would keep the animals from crossing from one side to the other.
And I bet this is another one of those, rarely get to talk to the boys alone, but it's one of those fleeting moments. She's looking at him, but he's looking away in this picture. Oh, look at this one.
Well, I don't know. Now it's a little bit different,
Yes.
called on the stile. So that's why I point out what a stile is. It's this like stepping contraption, so to speak. And it was a way for neighbors to cross over the fence. So it's called on the stile from 1878. So in this one, they're actually together. So
And
not sure
she's
what.
dressed all in white in this one, so we have to make sure we keep that pureness there.
Yeah, what is that? What does that all mean?
And her, interestingly, in this one, the hat ribbons are blowing away. The other one, I think, just had a basic bonnet on.
Ah, that's very observant. I didn't notice that, but yeah, you're right.
See, these people are working. These two are have a little more leisure going on.
Yeah. So again, kind of interesting that two similar subjects and he's made a few changes.
Polly said he's leading her astray.
Could be.
And she's carrying an implement, a work implement. So, it's almost like they could have planned it to kind of sort of be in the same area at the same time, but they're really both
Mhm.
doing something else.
Mhm. And then whenever I think of these paintings or look at them, I think of Little House on the Prairie. Even though Homer's in New England, and Little House on the Prairie is kind of more on the western frontier of the United States, but just this kind of agrarian life and kind of this simpler time, so to speak. When I look at these paintings, I tend to think of a Little House on the Prairie.
That's, yeah. I get it.
A different part of the country, but kind of a similar.
Right. You wouldn't have had the New England experience or like an agrarian experience. And yet this Little House on the Prairie was a TV era thing. So, well, I mean, the books were written before that, but the visuals came from TV.
Mhm. Let's
Little
see. Fred said,
Wellington.
could they be brother and sister? I don't think so because they're on different sides of the fence.
Yeah.
And my sister is amazing, but I don't recall ever holding her hand, but maybe that was just an art thing. So
You
I don't
know,
know. It could, but you know what?
two
If that's what works for you, then all good. And speaking of, Little House on the Prairie and, rural life, Reading by the Brook from 1879. Three Boys on the Shore from 1885. This is unusual. Well, not really unusual, but an interesting composition. He's got three bands here. So the first band is the sky, and the second band is the water, and the third band is the boys and the land. Well, I guess you could actually say four bands if you count the boys as one and the land as another one. and really warm colors on this one. And so, again, amazing Homer, the guy who has no children, he's just doing one picture after another, just cranking them out for years of all these children. And people are snapping these paintings up. Now, Homer was in the news recently. Let's see this headline from January 24th, 2025. Christie's, which is an art auction house based in New York, sells two Winslow Homer watercolors appraised on Antiques Roadshow. So this woman brought these two paintings in and wanted to know if they were worth anything. And they're like, yeah, these are worth like quite a bit. And she had Christie's sell them for her, and she pocketed $189,000. So the next time you're in your grandparents' garage or the local flea market, you should be on the lookout for things that look like this. Might be financially beneficial for you, which is why we do these programs. See, you guys are thinking that maybe we just do this stuff for fun. No, there's monetary reasons why you should know about these artworks.
Robert's on the prowl for lost art.
Right. Hey, I think most of us could use 189,000.
Exactly.
And besides, even if I couldn't, I would take the 189. I could donate it to charity. All right. So children, any thoughts on children before we continue on to the next subject, Patty or Brad?
Well, there's definitely a sense of idealism.
Oh,
And
yeah, that's a good point.
if he did have PTSD, I mean, it would have been therapeutic for him to be focused on possibility rather than calamity.
Oh, yeah, I like that idea, Patty. That's good observation. Brad, what about yourself? Any thoughts on children?
Yeah, they're phenomenal subjects, and children at play has obviously been a big thing for Homer.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, I mean, he carved out a big part of his career doing these types of works.
at the end of the Civil War, going away from that horrible thing, it's a pretty good thing to switch to something innocent.
Hmm.
And again, go back to that quote from Shelby Foote about it being the Civil War being a crossroads and
Hmm.
opening us up to who we could become.
Hmm.
I think that quote fits perfectly, Robert. Good find.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Homer travels quite a bit throughout his life, and he ends up traveling south to see what's going on in the former Confederacy after the Civil War. And during his time there, he mostly does depictions of African Americans, which is a little bit unusual because at this point in time in American history, late or 1800s, you don't often see as many depictions of African Americans by Caucasian artists. Or if you do, they're oftentimes like caricatures or things like that, or not depicted in a positive light. But Homer's doing something very different here. This painting is called Contraband from 1875. It's a soldier and a young boy. It looks like they're sharing water from a canteen and dealing with the subjects of emancipation and then also humanity. Emancipation relating to the fact, of course, that Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. So this is a pamphlet from the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture. These Emancipation Proclamations were printed, and they were given to the Union soldiers to distribute to the people in the South, both white and black, so that they were familiar with the Emancipation Proclamation. And here's another one called Taking Sunflower to Teacher from 1875.
I'm thinking, Robert, 1875, that was the year of the compromise that brought Reconstruction to an end and Rutherford Hayes into the presidency. Um, he's a Northerner, and one of the things that I think it's hard for people to necessarily think about or appreciate is there were a lot of Northerners that were crazed about the idea of abolition. And I don't mean that in any bad way. I'm simply saying it was an obsession. That's why Lawrence, Kansas was named Lawrence, Kansas. People literally went to settle areas from their homes so they could keep them from becoming slave. I'm wondering if part of this turn to that is spurred by the change, the 1875 compromise, and also thinking about how that Civil War came about and how many people really thought of the consequences that were going to come about.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good
Or
question.
a retrospective, I guess, is what I'm saying. He's having a chance now to think back.
Hmm. Let's see. Oh, just FYI. So sunflowers represent a lot of different types of things, but oftentimes life and happiness. And then the butterfly, it's interesting that that's included also. Um, Oftentimes can represent transformation or even hope. So perhaps the sunflower and the butterfly were included for very specific reasons. Perhaps, not sure.
Oh, Catherine, Lawrence, Massachusetts was a hotbed of abolitionism. And so they just, when this group of them organized and moved to Kansas to keep it from becoming slave, they just named what is now Lawrence, Kansas. They named that Lawrence. So they're literally translating their life into the South.
Okay. Let's see. Here's one of the more well-known works in this era. This is at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. It's called The Cotton Pickers from 1876. So the Reconstruction began in 1865, and then as Patty had mentioned, by the mid 1870s, it's really starting to peter out, and it pretty much officially ended in 1877. And so here's two women that are working out in the cotton fields. And again, the history of agriculture is more and more mechanization and less manual labor. So now they don't really have people picking cotton. Usually, it's usually done by machines. But that being said, they didn't have these machines, of course, after the Civil War. And it's still a very labor-intensive industry. A number of people working in this endeavor. And here's what an art historian had to say about this painting. Homer revisited the South in the mid 1870s. So he actually travels down to the South 10 years after the Civil War to witness the change, or rather the absence of it, that Reconstruction had brought to the lives of former slaves. The result was a work like The Cotton Pickers, stately, silent, and with barely a flicker of sadness on their faces. The two black women picked cotton before the war, and they are still picking cotton afterward. And again, noteworthy that he's depicting these individuals these two subjects as individual people and not as caricatures, which that may not seem all that surprising in 2025, but back in 1876, there unfortunately were a lot of depictions of not just African Americans, but other um, racial groups in very caricature ways, whether they were Asian or Hispanic or Native American, and then really noteworthy facial expressions on these two subjects. One's looking down, perhaps contemplating things, and then one looking off into the distance.
Yeah, they're definitely not picking cotton because they're standing too tall for that. They're thinking, they're taking a break in between picking.
And here's a painting we talked about last night. It's called A Visit from the Old Mistress from 1876. Has to do with emancipation and Reconstruction. It's a noteworthy painting given the earth tones that are really prevalent in this, and in contrast with the black dress of the woman on the right. And so the thought being here is perhaps this was a mistress from a plantation, and she's visiting the cabin of these African American women, and it looks like a little bit of a tense situation. So we don't really know what the purpose of this visit is. But the title of the painting is A Visit from the Old Mistress. And so you can see there's a little bit of a standoffishness between the woman on the right and the people on the left.
She's used to deference, I think.
Yeah, could be. An unwelcome visitor. So Homer does a good job of showing tension in this painting. You know, if you think about it, at least for myself, when I consider artists, oh, did they capture the way this person looks realistically, or did they capture the landscape nicely? You don't oftentimes as readily think about showing emotions or feelings or tension in paintings, but he's done that here very effectively. And then the physical separation, perhaps representing the racial divide, still taking place. And then also noteworthy that they're on equal footing. Now, this woman is sitting. These two are standing, but notice they're face to face. In fact, if you look at their eye line, they're on par with one another. So that's noteworthy.
Well, a lot of our history, Robert, I mean, America is like literally the only country founded on an idea. And you see that idea being, and the contradictions within that idea being explored in a lot of these American painters,
Mm-hmm.
especially the contradictions or the tension, I'm saying.
Yeah, the tension. It's hard to notice in this image because it's a reproduction, but you can notice it on the painting when you look at it in person. But this woman's wearing a wedding ring. And the significance of that is they did have marriages between enslaved people before emancipation, but they weren't legally recognized. They oftentimes weren't necessarily of their own choosings. I mean, sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. But noteworthy that he's has this woman standing here with her child, and she's wearing a wedding ring, which would have been much more uncommon in the era before emancipation. So I wanted to point that out. This is at the Cincinnati Art Museum, Sunday Morning in Virginia, 1877. Education and religion. It's a group of individuals and they're reading the Bible. So a young woman looks like she's leading a reading the Bible with three younger counterparts, with an older woman off to the side. So Homer traveling to Virginia and points south and documenting what's going on in the world of African Americans in the decade after the Civil War.
And until very recently, it would have been illegal for these people to even think about learning to read.
Yeah, and that's thanks, Patty, for mentioning that because I forgot to include that. But yeah, there's actually the artists that are making depictions of African Americans. They're frequently doing things that they couldn't have done before, getting married, reading, studying the Bible, going to church, and stuff like that. So noteworthy that he's including that subject here. And then this is dressing for the carnival, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This was kind of like a Independence Day type of celebration, but at the same time, the figure in the center, he has kind of like this Harlequin type attire. You can see this young girl here's got an American flag she's holding, as does
Oh, yeah.
Dexter. So there you go. Homer's depictions of African Americans and Reconstruction. All right, let's talk about Homer's time in Maine. This is the place that's probably most associated with him. Even though Homer, he's born in Boston, he lives much of his life in New York City. He spends a great deal of time traveling around New England. In his later years, he ends up moving to Maine, and that's pretty much where he spends the last several decades of his life. But before that, he ends up taking a trip to England in 1881 and 1882, and this painting is called Hark the Lark, and that references a Shakespeare work. Hark, hark, the lark at heaven's gate sings. And so to show you where Homer was living, he wasn't living in London, although he did pass through there. He's living up in northeast New England or northeast England, which is noteworthy because when he comes back to America, he's going to be living in northeast New England or in Maine.
Notice a change in the color. I mean, there's nowhere near the amount of reddish rosiness.
Yeah, there's a lot of earth tones on this one.
There's a little touch in the girl in the back, but other than that, it's a whole different sense of tone.
And so then after that experience, In 1883, Homer returns to the United States. From 1883 to 1910, the American painter Winslow Homer lived and worked in a coastal studio in Prouts Neck, Maine, where he created many of his masterpieces. Winslow's Homer Studio in Prouts Neck, Maine is a National Historic Landmark. So you can actually visit this site. Here's Homer in his studio. We'll talk about this painting that he's standing in front of in a little bit. And if you want to check out Winslow Homer Studio, it's highly rated on TripAdvisor, and it was the residence and workplace of Winslow Homer for the final 26 years of his life. So again, Homer, he's successful as an artist. He can afford a nice house like this along the shore. Here's the outside. Here's the view of the water. And of course, he's near the shore, which is important because he does all these depictions of the sea. So kind of remember this picture because you'll see paintings that look just like this in a little bit. Just as a reminder, we're recording this program for our YouTube channel. Okay, so you really see a different approach to Homer's artwork after he goes to England and spends the year there. He now, moving forward, is going to be focusing almost exclusively on depictions of the sea. And there's still going to be people in the paintings, at least initially, although gradually over time, they're going to be phased out as well. A lot of these depictions from this era are kind of like man versus the sea or people versus nature type of theme. So this is the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It's called The Lifeline from 1884. It's this dramatic ship rescue. So there's a ship that's in distress. Another group of individuals have sent a lifeline out there, so to speak, and this guy is rescuing this woman from the ship.
I think the original life-saving station, which eventually became the Coast Guard, was the one in this part of Maine.
Okay.
I think there was another one in Virginia, maybe, Brad?
Yeah, there's one down in North Carolina, Virginia area.
Yeah.
Near,
This one's at a historic site now.
yeah. And that bosun's chair is and can be an exciting ride, especially when it's overloaded like that.
Well, and a little bit controversial because you can see a little bit of the woman's bare leg. Oh my goodness. But, you know, she's in a precarious situation, so let it slide. So here's an interesting work. It's owned by a guy you've probably heard of, Bill Gates. Painting is called Lost on the Grand Banks, done in 1885. Bill Gates bought this painting back in 2018. He actually has a really significant art collection. He spent $30 million on it, which is a record price for a Winslow Homer painting. So if you've been using Microsoft, thank you very much. This is called The Herring Net. It's a painting at the Art Institute Chicago from 1885. Again, it's kind of the man versus the nature or man versus the sea type of theme. 1883, Homer moves from New York City to Maine. He kind of gives up the previous types of subject matter that we've seen. And here he's depicting North Atlantic fishermen. They're doing battle with the sea, trying to bring in their catch of the day. And here is the catch. Herring fish. So they put the net out, scoop them up into the boat, and then sail back to shore. And we talked about this before. The Homer's incorporating drama into some of his paintings. You can see that here. He does have a lot of boats out here, but these aren't leisure boats. These are people using the boats for their livelihood. And Patty was talking about it before, how, you know, this is a very, very dangerous line of work. This isn't like, you know, sitting in an office as a clerk. People could easily get killed or injured out here, and they're battling the sea and the winds and the storms and all those types of things.
I think it's among the top 5 usually still for dangerous jobs.
Oh, is it? Oh, I didn't know that. Wow, but it does make sense. I mean, I would imagine there's only so much, even with modern technology, there's only so much safety. you can have. And
Well,
then here's a
this is
close.
kind of wild. I mean, you could plan as much as you want, but you're never gonna. Actually, there was a guy whose boat, I forget what the cause was, but his boat sunk suddenly just a couple of years ago, and he held on to a cooler, and literally somebody found him. But it still happens. I mean, it's just. And there was another one just last summer, I think, where a whale breached and knocked right under a boat and knocked the people into the water.
Okay. Let's see. Speaking of New England, this painting is at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. It's one of his, the previous one we saw, this is one of his more well-known works in this era, as is this one. This is called The Fog Warning from 1885. Again, man versus nature, man versus the sea. This is a North Atlantic fisherman. He's out catching halibut. And what Homer would do is he would go out to the sea and make sketches and then come back to his studio and make the painting. So obviously he's not out in a boat making this painting at this point in time. But what you have going on here is a bigger ship would release these smaller vessels with one or two sailors, and these guys would catch the fish, and then they would go back to the main ship and then be taken ashore. Well, the storm is rolling in, and it's getting late, and the winds look like they're picking up the waves, and so he needs to make it back to the ship. Otherwise, he's going to be left behind, and he'll probably die out here. So really, kind of like a life and death moment, displaying the dangers that was involved in this activity. And this one also featured in a stamp back in 1998. Here's the fish that he's captured. And again, the fog warning. So the fog is rolling in. And if the fog does roll in before he gets to the ship, he's not going to be able to see it. So, I mean, if you think about if you're driving and the fog comes out, you can't see very far ahead. And he's going to have that same problem here. So he's got to frantically get back to the ship ASAP and hope that he makes it.
And they can't see him either.
Yeah, and plus he's not the only boat out there. There's numerous ones, and they've probably gone in all different directions. And so, yeah, very dangerous, challenging way to make a living. Really great depiction of earth tones here and the sense of drama.
And suspense. He's
Yeah,
not
drama
sure.
and suspense. This is called Eight Bells from 1886. Eight bells refers to a timekeeping device that ships would use.
And do they call that a sextant, that thing he's using?
I believe so. Yeah, the one guy on the left's holding a sextant,
Yep.
and the guy on the right's holding a chronometer. How did you know that, Brad?
I've used a sextant before.
Oh, really? Oh, that's cool.
What with a chronometer? Because when I hear chrono, I think either time or color.
Well, if you're gonna do a sextant reading, you either need a good heading for your ship, and you also need a time.
Okay, so he's measuring the time, chrono. Okay.
Signal of distress. Depiction of the stormy North Atlantic. Homer actually worked on this particular painting for 6 years. He kept tweaking things on it, which is not highly unusual for artists. They do that periodically. And it looks like they're sending a lifeboat out to this other ship to see what's going on, or perhaps to rescue somebody. The Lookout, All's Well from 1896, another North Atlantic mariner.
Think of what it would take to become a fisherman. Think of what it would take to dedicate yourself to being a lifesaver at that time. It's like you're volunteering to go in at the worst time.
Yeah, in the dangerous places, like a fireman.
Yeah.
The Coast Guard's motto is Semper Paratus, but their other motto was, "You have to go out, you don't have to come back."
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Let's see. This is at the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh, called The Wreck from 1896. So in the foreground, you have these rescuers, and in the background, there's some spectators. So there's probably been a wreck near the shore, and they're going out to see if they can rescue the people.
And there are actually up and down the New England coast, there are stories about this kind of shipwreck. the real stories. It's sort of like various local wrecks of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Hmm. Because yeah, well, I mean, think about it. If you get stranded out there, you somehow have to get back to the shore. Um,
And it's
so
usually a huge tragedy because of the number of people never found, the amount of whatever was involved lost. So yeah, they're pretty legendary.
There's two good movies on those subjects, though. That's sort of off topic, but Perfect Storm and The Finest Hours. Both involve boats out of Massachusetts in
oh, yeah.
bad storms and show the power of the sea.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. Thanks, Brad. This is
Yeah,
what's
the
that, Patty?
opening of Storm were actually shot at the actual Gloucester waterfront. If anybody wanted to compare, like when Homer's work to actual fishing villagery, that is the actual Gloucester working waterfront that opens on.
Oh, okay. This is another one of Homer's well-known paintings called the Gulf Stream. He lived in the Bahamas, or I should say vacation, kind of had like working vacations in the Bahamas for several years, but it's a variation of the man versus nature theme. This particular one, though, is not in New England, though, it's in the Bahamas. And you have a guy here, he's on a boat, and you can see the mast is broken. So he's in great danger. There's also a water spout that looks like is off in the distance. There's a ship here, but not sure. It looks like he can't see the ship, and perhaps the ship doesn't see him. And then to complicate matters even further, the boat's being circled by sharks.
A good dozen or so, it looks like.
Homer was preoccupied with the power of the ocean and often made it the subject of his art, whether at home on the coast of Maine or while traveling. Homer based this dramatic scene on imminent disaster on sketches and watercolors he made during winter trips to the Bahamas. A man faces his demise on a dismast, rudderless fishing boat while threatened by sharks and a distant waterspout. He is oblivious to the schooner on the left horizon, a sign of hopeful rescue. The painting has been interpreted as an expression of the artist's presumed sense of mortality and vulnerability, as well as more universal concerns with the fragility of human life and the dominance of nature. So, not sure what the outcome will be, but hopefully he's okay.
Almost hard to feel hopeful though, looking at this
Yeah,
picture.
Let's be
the,
hopeful.
Yeah.
the cards are stacked against.
And he left no notes, I suppose, telling us how it came out.
No. um, so yeah, this whole man versus the sea. And as I mentioned, Homer does spend a fair amount of time in the Bahamas. It gets cold up in Maine in the winter, so going to the Bahamas in the winter months was very helpful. And when he's going down there, there's not as nearly as many people in the Bahamas as there are now. So in 1885, when Homer was first starting to visit there, there's only 45,000 people living on all the different islands of the Bahamas. Now there's over 400,000. And he does a whole series of depictions of kind of local people doing kind of everyday activities, so to speak. So here's two guys that are out shark fishing. It's interesting, the shark, which we often think of a predator, in this particular case, is being depicted as the prey.
He's just a few years before Hemingway.
Yeah. Here's Sponge Fisherman from 1885, again depicting daily life in the Bahamas. So back in the days when the sponges came from the ocean.
And these guys are divers. They don't, yeah, that's how they get sponges.
Yeah, sponge divers. And interesting colors in these, and these are watercolors, so they have kind of like a wash effect. And then of course the bright sun.
Divers with no scuba equipment, by the way.
Yeah, doing it freestyle. Again, another depiction of the Bahamas. This is a fruit vendor. The painting is called Rest, so it looks like she's probably walking around with this fruit that she would be selling to different individuals. This is called A Garden in Nassau, also from 1885. This one is interesting. People have kind of wondered if he's trying to imply a message here, because there's this lush garden over here, and then there's this high wall, and the young boy is looking over the wall. So it's a very kind of divisive type of setup, and maybe it's just by chance, or is he perhaps trying to imply something here? Not quite sure.
Well, this would have been still in the more colonial era. I mean, it's still a colony, but I mean, it's still
Hmm.
part of the British, whatever, Commonwealth, I guess they call it.
Hmm.
But yeah, that would have been much more divisionary at that point, I think.
Oh yeah, much more segregated.
Yeah.
And then here's what Patty was talking about a minute ago, sponge diver. So yeah, I mean, you're pretty much just going down to the bottom and grabbing the sponges and bringing them back up. This is at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston.
That boat's pretty basic.
Yeah. So there you go. His time in the Bahamas. And then we're getting into the last section of Homer's life and career, these main seascapes. And so by this point in time, Homer's, getting up there in years. He's an older gentleman. He's at a very established career. He's been painting for a long time. The thing that's noteworthy about these works is most of them don't have any human figures whatsoever. Remember, we just saw painting after painting of children and people on farms and stuff like that. And Homer was a pretty personable, friendly guy, but he was also, especially later in his years, somewhat of a recluse and an introvert. And it's interesting as you go through these paintings. Number one, just note the depiction of the sea and the ocean over and over again. And a few of them do have people here and there, but they're usually not very prominent. So to me, that's kind of unusual, just because we saw those dozens and dozens of children and adults on these farms, and he's really just kind of moved beyond that. So again, remember, he moved to Maine in 1883, and he spent the last many years of his life living there. And this was his first pure seascape painting. He made it in 1890, and it's
A
showing.
lot of creative people, are extroverts, but they don't necessarily realize it until they get older. And
Okay.
whoops, did I just shut you off?
Oh no, we can still hear you. Oh, and then I've mentioned different times that I
I
used to
think I
work at
just
it.
shut you off.
You're still
Oh,
bad.
yeah, we can still hear you, Patty. Um, I've mentioned many times that I worked at Detroit Institute of Arts early in my life. I also had an internship at the Toledo Museum of Art, so I have kind of a lot of sentimental attachment to that museum. For the summer that I interned at the Toledo Museum of Art, which also has a outstanding art collection, including this painting. Winslow Homer skillfully conveys nature's power with waves crashing against rocks, sunlight on the coast, ironically titled since the sun has struggled to break through the gloom of an approaching storm, was Homer's first pure seascape in oils. From this point on, he moved away from narrative subjects to primarily scenes of the sea in all its majestic force, painted outdoors. His move in 1883 to Prouts Neck, Maine, where he established a seaside studio, was a withdrawal from the noise and commotion of the city to devote himself instead to the solitary life of the artist. And here's a quote from Homer: "The life that I have chosen gives me my full hours of enjoyment for the balance of my life. The sun will not rise or set without my notice and thanks." So he just does all these different depictions of the ocean and the waves and the shore and these types of things. And this particular one doesn't have any people in it, but there are a few that do have um, kind of people accessorized to the painting, which you'll see in just a moment. Like this one, you'll be able to see it better when we zoom in, but there's a couple figures up here. They're as small as possible, and it's the Atlantic Ocean versus the rocks. This is High Cliffs, coast of Maine at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. Here's the two people up here. If you weren't on the lookout for them, you would very easily miss them. He does a great job depicting the rocky shoreline of the Maine coast. This is on a lee shore from 1900. This one has a boat in it. Metropolitan Museum of Art Nor'easter from 1895. You might have heard that term before. A nor'easter is a storm of exceptional violence and duration. And again, no people being depicted here.
Kudos, Robert, for pronouncing that properly.
What's that, nor'easter?
Yes,
Oh, well,
that's
thank
one
you. I
of those
appreciate
are you
that.
from here or away questions. If you're saying northeaster, everybody knows.
Oh, or nor'easter. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, anybody who pronounces the TH is lost to begin with. It's an old Yankee word.
Well, I'm familiar with the pronunciation because I spent a few weeks vacation in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Oh yeah. And didn't you say your
No,
mom was
no, I'm kidding.
didn't you say your mom was originally from New Bedford?
Yeah, my grandma, my mom's mom was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts. You can tell if someone is from New England if they say Worcester versus Worcester or something
Yeah.
like that.
Worcester, kind
Cleveland
of like
Museum of Art. Oh,
What's
sorry.
Worcester.
Yeah, yeah, you had the even better pronunciation. Cleveland Museum of Art. Early morning after a storm at sea. This was one of Winslow Homer's favorite paintings that he made. He liked this particular one. Again, no people, which amazing because we just saw painting after painting after painting, including people in them. He didn't really do a lot of, say, pure landscapes, but he did these seascapes at the end of his career. And this is the last painting that he completed. So you can see Winslow Homer passed away in 1910. He finished this painting in 1909. He was 73 years old, which that was a really long life for someone born in 1836. So the last painting he completed, and it's the culmination of his career. And you can look at this and maybe imply a narrative in it. So again, it's kind of the man versus the sea. There's this guy down here. He's facing away from us. He's doing something. There's this big log here. I don't know if he's trying to move it or he's trying to climb over it. The sea looks very violent. There is a seagull up here, interestingly enough.
That
But
was still the era when they were floating logs down the streams. So yeah, in a storm, you would have stuff that would get loose and end up in
Mhm,
weird places. To this day, after a storm, people will come to the ocean. And it's getting, now that we have a lot more flooding, it's getting kind of crazy because literally you have to have law enforcement out keeping people from coming closer. It's but it is like a tribal instinct.
mhm,
It's very strange. Well, I mean, you can see why. Lots of stuff shows up that you wouldn't have thought would show up. But
mhm,
literally, very recently, one of the more recent storms we had, an old shipwreck on one of the beaches got uncovered.
mhm.
It's
Wow.
very, it's fascinating.
Mhm. Let's see. So yeah, speaking of fascinating, so yeah, fascinating that this is the last painting that Winslow Homer. It's this kind of guy, and he's struggling against the nature or against the sea. And what's is there any additional meaning behind this, or it just happened to be a coincidence? This was his last painting. So Driftwood from 1909, Man versus Nature. Oh, and it's hard to see, but there's a ship way over here on the left. Sorry, I forgot to point that out earlier. And then a seagull on the right. So it's this man versus the powerful and expansive ocean. And some people have wondered maybe this is Homer's way of kind of looking back towards his career and thinking about his life and all the things that have happened. Here's a close up on the right, seagull, and the ship on the left, way off in the distance, and a close up of the man doing something with the log. He's interacting with it in some form or another. And so there you have it, Maine Seascape. So Winslow Homer, born in 1836, he passed away in 1910. So wow, he really went through a lot of transformations in an artist. Remember, he starts out in the Civil War. Well, actually, before that, even he was a magazine illustrator, then the Civil War, then kind of the post-Civil War leisure, and these depictions of rural life. And that involved the children's depictions. Then he went did African Americans and reconstructions in the Confederacy or former Confederacy. Then he goes to England, comes back, does the man versus the sea type of theme, spends some time in the Bahamas, and then he does these main seascapes. And there you have it, Winslow Homer. So we'll wrap things up in the next few minutes. But before we do, Patty and Brad, any final thoughts on Winslow Homer?
Well, I'm curious, did he ever do anything else that's known that even picked up on any of the themes or colors in the butterfly one?
Oh, well, I mean, I've pretty much shown you every famous painting he made. I mean, he
Really?
made a lot. And there are a few other, so like he was into hunting, and so he did like a hunting series, but I didn't have time to show those. So I'm not
That's
really
just kind
sure.
of a big detour.
What's that?
That was just kind of a big detour he decided to play with.
Oh yeah. Well, it is always fascinating to see how artists careers evolve over time, whether it's Claude Monet or George O'Keeffe or George Caleb Bingham or Winslow Homer.
But you don't often find that one, that just is completely different from everything else, do you? Or you would know more than I would about that.
Oh, I mean, once in a while, I mean, there was a few paintings from Bingham that were kind of a little bit different than the
Yeah.
other stuff that he did. So, Brad, what about you? Any final thoughts on Winslow
I'm
Homer?
very impressed with his uh, seascapes and his things down in the Bahamas. They really add to those early paintings of the sailboats that sort of show the power of the sea.
Oh yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think maybe now that we've seen more of these paintings as you're out in your travels or reading things, you'll come across these Homer. We're like, oh, I remember this depiction of the children, or I remember this
Yeah,
seascape.
he really covered a lot in his life
Yeah, very a lot of
and a lot of
diversity of
variety.
topics.
Stick
A
with
lot
one.
of what?
He didn't stick with one subject for 50 or 70 years. He jumped all around.
Yeah, he would do things kind of for a few years and then kind of move on to something else.
Do you know if he still went south in the winter after he retired to Maine?
Oh, yeah, he did because those paintings that he made in the Bahamas were while he was residing in Maine full time. So he would have
Mhm.
gone down this there for those winters. Hmm.
That's a tradition that still exists in New England, the snowbird tradition.
That
Well, yeah, it
that
gets cold up there. Let's see. So we've been recording this program. We'll post it on our Washington D.C. History and Culture YouTube channel. That probably won't take place though until for a couple days. It we usually have to go through and check the program just to make sure there's no issues with it. But I'll send out the link for it when it's ready to go. And if you want to listen to it again or forward it to someone, you are more than welcome to do so. Thank you very much. And Brad and Patty, as always, I greatly appreciate you taking time out of your weekend to come join us and share your perspectives with us. So thank you very much, and thanks to our audience.
I think we're all so glad to be back doing these programs with you, Robert.
Oh, well, thank you. It's good to be back.
and we will see you again at 8 o'clock.
That sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Musical section.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Switching gears. So, all right, everyone. Thanks. Have a great weekend. We'll